If you were given a box that contained a string that told you how long you would live for, would you open the box? Would you find out how long you will live for? Or would you rather not know? That is the question that is asked by everyone in the book The Measure by Nikki Erick. But instead of the book trying to solve the mysteries of the boxes and how they ended up there in the first place, this book follows a number of different characters as they live in the new reality of the boxes. In this episode, we will discuss the plot, characters, and themes of The Measure. The plot of this book was very straightforward. Since the purpose of the book is to explore social topics, it doesn't follow the true plot structure. It asks questions and addresses situations that may occur if something like getting a box would occur in real life. It's clear to me that this book was written during the pandemic because it explores many of the issues and concerns that were being raised during the pandemic, such as how to find peace when life feels out of control. Is the information that I'm reading true? What can I do to make a difference? And what can I do with my life to give it meaning? In the exposition, we meet Mira and Ben, who are our main characters. Both of them are waking up to a new world with the boxes. Then we jump a few weeks and then a few months into the future as people are dealing with the new reality of the boxes. As scientists learn more about the boxes, they learn that they really do predict how long you live for. Each of the main characters deals with challenges that are being presented to short stringers. Ben finds out from his girlfriend that he has a short string as she dumps him. Javier deals with the fact that his short string will be keeping him from reaching his dreams of military success. Mara struggles with the idea that she will never be able to have a family because of her own short string. However, I love that Amy doesn't open her box. Unlike the other characters, she feels like her life is best served by just living oblivious to her string. She feels content in her life and living it, and thinking about the possibilities of what if. As the book continues, each of these characters deals with the knowledge of the strings in different ways. The climax of the book is when everything is brought to a head politically. Anthony has been elected as president, and his presidency has helped to create a divide between short stringers and long stringers. And yet, all of the characters in the novel are realizing that their lives shouldn't be determined by their strings. All of the characters are at a rally, and that seems to be the turning point towards hope in the book. At this rally, a young woman from Africa starts a movement that reminds people that short strings are just as valuable as long strings, and that we should go back to living our lives that way. She reminds people that we are more alike than unalike. Then everyone realizes that the strings are not as big of a deal as we were making them out to be. This book has a lot of resolution, which is something that I love as a reader. We get to see what happened to all the short stringers at the end of their lives. Mara meets Jack and writes a piece about Javier and his life. Then Mara and Nina's lives together before Mara's end. And then at the most heartbreaking part of the book, Ben and Amy pass away, and Nina takes care of their children. This really tugs at your heartstrings. However, I think that we learn so much with their passing and Nina's new life. The structure of this book does a great job at helping us to understand the themes and the ideas in the novel. But before we dive into themes, let's talk about characters. This book uses characters to explore the ideas in the book, so all of the characters are so well developed and realistic. The character I related most to was Amy. Amy is an English teacher who lives in a fantasy world. She sees the importance of talking to her students about the strings and celebrating the people who had short lives but still made a difference, and vice versa. She also chooses not to look at her box because she wants to be able to picture her life in both ways and still dream. I think that I would react to many things just like Amy would. Amy's sister Nina was an excellent character, and while she is loyal and strong, one of her key traits was anxiety. Nina represented many of us during the pandemic. She found herself in the deep, dark corners of the internet, doing research on everything and anything she could get her hands on. And because she was a journalist, she does so, for the most part, responsibly. However, it does become draining on her personal life with Mara. I think all of us saw a little bit of ourselves in Nina and her need to control all the situations around her, as she learns to just embrace her life. Mara was another great character. I think that we all need a Mara in our lives. She's strong yet caring. She knows how to stand up for herself and how to be brave for others. Her female rage represented many of the women that live now. As a Black woman, she had experienced all kinds of hate her whole life for being who she was, and having a short string on top of all of that was just too much. Watching her wrestle with her feelings and fight for her freedom was one of my favorite parts of this book. Also, her and Nina coming together, even though they had separate string lengths, was so inspiring. Nina realizes that before the string, she loved Mara, and she still wanted to spend the rest of her life with Mara. That realization was so important for the book, and it will be something I talk about a little bit later. Ben's story was truly heartbreaking. Could you imagine coming home to your partner and them telling you awful news and then dumping you all at the same time? It's enough to make anyone bitter. Yet he's able to make peace with it and have a great life with Amy. Ben's journey was important for the novel because he was such a solid and reliable character. Yes, he showed growth by accepting his fate, but for most of the book, he remained consistent. He does his job, and he was just a genuine, good person. Even though his string was short, he lived his best life, and he and Amy were happy. Javier and Jack gave the book more depth. While the journey of other characters was interesting, I was drawn to these two characters and their friendship. Both of these two were stuck on paths and were able to aid each other by simply switching strings. It's interesting because most people had a negative experience with the strings, but these two had an overall positive experience with them. I also love to see their progression. I think it mirrors many relationships. They started out as friends, then had a falling out, and then were able to bring themselves to be friends again. I think that showing the stages of friendship throughout our lives is an important part of modern literature, and this story of friendship added just another layer to this piece. One character I wasn't a fan of was Anthony. I thought he was too heavy-handed. It's clear who this character is supposed to represent, but I thought it was just too much. The fact that he's using religion to justify his agenda and how he uses a catastrophe and the distress of the strings was just too much. I think Anthony, being one of the main characters and his perspectives, was one of the reasons I rated this book a 4 instead of a 5. He could have easily been a part of the book without having his perspective. Yes, his part of the story was an unfortunate truth. It was just not needed for me. I get the kind of person she was trying to create, but the representation felt very didactic. Instead of letting us just feel out of control from the point of view of the other characters, we had to see the world through this man who only cared about getting what he wanted. While I understand that adding his perspective shows people that all these people want is power, I think there was too much of an agenda behind this character, and I don't think that art should exist just to be political. For the most part, the characters in this book were inspiring. Nina was loyal, Mara was strong, Amy was stable, Ben was kind. The side characters such as Hank showed us the value of living your best life, even if it's short. I thought the characters were well developed and helped us to understand the themes. The most obvious topic in this book is racism and prejudice. Just like you cannot control your race or skin color, you cannot control your string length. I think that showing people the effects of racism by talking about how long you live was a brilliant move. However, I do think that move was a bit heavy-handed. Let's look at some quotes that deal with this subject. Which means we can start fresh, reject the patterns of history, promise not to repeat old mistakes. We can lead with compassion and empathy, fight back against people who look to divide us or pit us against one another or make anyone feel less than. It's up to us, the ones who have yet to receive our boxes, to decide what type of world we wish to inherit, no matter how much time our strings may have given us. Quote 2. We segment ourselves based on race or class or religion or whatever distinctions we decide to make up, and then we insist on treating each other differently. Quote 3. Fight back against those who divide us or pit us against one another or make us feel any less than. As people, we naturally divide ourselves. We tend to prefer people who look like us and think like us, because that's what used to keep us alive. However, we no longer need this trait, but it's so ingrained into our brains and in our culture that it's hard work, and you constantly need to check your prejudices. But it's worth doing. As we saw in this novel, the people who came together, regardless of string length, were able to find happiness. So when you hear a comment that divides, maybe point out that comment, or make a point that we are all the same. That helps to end these divisions. It's clear that another one of the topics this book covers is time and the length of time that we have on Earth. That's the measure of our lives. Here's a quote about time that stood out to me. The woman shrugged. I hear of these Americans. They say strings have made them think again about their lives. How do you say their priorities? Mara offered. Si, their priorities. But in Italy, I think we already knew. We already put the art first, the food first, the passion first, she explained, a sweep of her arm encompassing the entire shop. We already put the family first. We did not need the strings to tell us what is most important. Quote 2. If after 15 years of chaos and fear, the world had seen enough of strings, short and long and every measure in between, to know that any length was possible, and so perhaps the length didn't matter. The beginning and the end may have been chosen for us, the strings already spun, but the middle had always been left undetermined to be woven and shaped by us. I read this book shortly after reading Real Americans. Both of these books deal with the aspects of time and how we use that time to our fullest. It made me reflect on the most important thing in my life, which is my family. I think the conclusion we come to at the end of the novel is that our life is not measured by the time we have, but what we do with that time. And I think that's a great takeaway. If I knew when I was going to die, I hope I would still try to live my life in a meaningful way. Another idea this novel covers is control, or the lack of control that we have in our lives. We see this with all of the characters, and how they deal with the way the world is spiraling around them teaches us important lessons. Nina tries to control her life by researching everything that comes up. She spends hours of her time deep diving into the depths of the internet and talking to people on discussion boards. This obsession is definitely something that felt familiar to me and probably rang true to many of us who lived in the pandemic. There was so much information online about COVID, information that was true, and information that existed to sow fear and discord. Just like with information about the strings, I'm sure many of us pored over all of this information, not knowing which of it was true and which of it was lies. I think the way Erick captured the fear and uncertainty was so important. I love how Mara helps Nina to step away from the material. It's good to have balance in your life and have someone real to talk about things in uncertain time. Mara dealt with this out of control situation by getting angry. She spent much of this book feeling frustrated and misunderstood and burnt out. Again, these are all familiar emotions to us, especially with how much we are bombarded with on a daily basis. I think that the author allowed her to feel mad, but then allowed her to find peace and happiness through Nina. In Mara and Nina's trip to Italy, the two are reminded of the important things in life, and then they decide to get married. This moment was a crucial turning point in the book for both of these characters, and while I'm sure they still had their struggles, they seemed genuinely happy, even though everything around them was still not perfect. Ben also feels anger in the book, and rightfully so. He deals with this anger by writing about his feelings to a friend, or to a person he didn't know. I think that this is a great way to deal with feelings that feel out of our control. By writing our thoughts down, we're able to leave them on the page and reflect on them. I thought this was a great way to show a way you can deal with things. Jack felt like much of his life was scripted for him, and there was not much he could do to control that script. From the time he was born, he only had one path laid out for him, and that seemed to be a trap. And leaving this made him feel so guilty about his choices. However, by switching with Javier, he was able to free himself from this path. And though both of them felt guilty about the switch, it was also so important. Jack and his grandfather were one of my favorite additions to the novel. Jack never gave up on being friends with Javier and realized the importance of having him in his life. That made me smile. He also gave Javier a chance to be more than he could have been. Both of these people were changed by just a flip of the script. So maybe we just need to look at something from a different perspective. Anthony was one of those people who capitalized on people's out of control feelings and used them to influence other people and take advantage of fears and prejudice that his followers had. There are many people out there that do so, and adding him was a way to show this. Basically, don't be Anthony. All in all, I feel like there were many positive things we learned about our lives when things are out of control, and the anxiety that comes when we cannot control all the outcomes of the situations in our lives. The book showed us many ways to deal with our feelings when they become too much to handle, and find hope even in dark times. I think a good ending note is this quote right here. Some things we just cannot control, she thought. But what about everything else? What about all the choices that we make each day? Who we choose to be and who we choose to love? I think the answer that Nina comes to is what ties all three of these ideas together. We can choose how we want to live our lives, how we want to spend our time, and how we treat the people around us. The impact we make might be small, but if you change just one life for the good, think about the chain effect that has. Each of us has the power to change someone else's life, even if that someone is ourselves. I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars. I do think at times this book borders on the line of art and politics. However, the book does explore many contemporary themes and helps us to think about what happened to us during our time with the COVID-19 pandemic with different eyes. So it was a great read. I would highly recommend this book for a book club or a book group because you will need to discuss this book with someone when you finished it. Thank you for listening to this episode of According to Your English Teacher. If you want to know what I am currently reading, you can find me on Instagram. My account is at according.to-your-English-teacher. I'm also on Goodreads and TikTok. I'd love to connect with you on any of these platforms. Also, if you wouldn't mind leaving this video a thumbs up or leaving the podcast a review, that would be amazing. Also, if you have not yet subscribed to the podcast, please make sure you do. This will let you know when I post new videos and is completely free to you. Your interaction with this podcast makes all the difference and helps me continue to talk about books, and it helps to grow our community. I'd like to leave you with one last quote. The great American writer Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "It's not the length of life, but the depth of life. You don't need a long lifetime to make an impact on this world. You just need the will to do so." This episode was written by me, Sam Gunther, and edited by Dallin Gunther. The music was done by Tom Brinton. Please join us next week as I review the books I read in August. As always, thanks for listening and happy reading.